Thank you.
Thank you. No, we are perfect on time, and that was fantastic. As you know, I am a fellow geo geek, but I do think it's really important to point out that you don't have to identify as a geographer to use GIS and for GIS to be a really valuable tool. We had another speaker yesterday from the global health technical professionals talking about global health careers with USAID. And two of her big takeaways were that data visualization is a growing trend, including things like GIS, as well as understanding how to kind of forge novel partnerships between groups. So that also I'm hearing reflected in today's conversations a lot with thinking about how we can really engage with communities and build partnerships in communities. So thank you so much for this. This was wonderful. And I threw a couple of comments in the chat. So there's a link down there about how Mason folks can access ArcGIS resources through our systems. And I also put, oh, the AAG, you mentioned the AAG, the American Association of Geographers. But with that, we can go ahead and begin our Q&A, and we can do this in 3 different ways. I would welcome anyone who has a question to go ahead and just unmute your mic and ask your question. We can just have a conversation now, including panelists. We can just chat with each other as well. If you don't feel comfortable just unmuting your mic to barge into the conversation, I welcome you to raise your hand, which you can do if you, I think, go to more. No, not more. If you click next to your name on the more, there should be a place to raise your hand. And then finally, you are welcome to type questions into the chat box and I'll call them out. Questions, anyone?
I have some questions, if I can go ahead.
Absolutely, Alexandra.
So first I wanted to say that I really love Joseph's story map idea. I think that's a unique perspective on the whole creating a website for yourself concept, which has been like told to me since undergrad, but just never has felt authentic to me. I never wanted to do that. And so I think that's something interesting that everyone has kind of touched on, which is like figuring out how to sell yourself authentically, which is not just like, friending as many people as you can on LinkedIn and hoping something happens with that. But I guess something I'd love to hear more from people is this concept of filling a need, and that's kind of a scary thing for especially younger people who don't have as many technical skills under their belt. Like, what does it mean to fill a need? How far do I have to put myself out there? And maybe it doesn't have to be a huge need like the COVID map made by a grad student, but there can be small differences. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I'll just add here that not a lot of people actually create a story map of their CV, so I'm glad you're onto that. And it doesn't have to be that long, right? Long is not necessarily better. I keep thinking about Mark Twain, 19th century author. He said, if I had more time with this manuscript, usually referring to one of his books, I would have made it shorter. Which I think is good for our times. So when I'm writing blog essays, my colleagues are rightly so saying, Joseph, it's kind of like your professors with your master's thesis. It needs to be focused. It needs to be shorter. So it's good words for me as well. And so, yeah, it doesn't have to be something you would spend more than, a short time on, and it'll be fun.
I think in the finding the need and feeling in that need, you always have the concern of I'm saying something that is really basic, or it is something that is gonna sound silly to the person that I'm approaching to, but it's not. Like, it's usually when we got something, you're gonna have two responses. Either they're getting really excited because you figure out something that they need to work on, or they're gonna get like the response to your need, like what you saw that maybe you bypass, and somebody said like, you're gonna get engaged because they're going to explain to you where's that need being addressed. So it's not, you're not going to have a bad outcome just approaching somebody, even though you don't have technical skills. I think just having the curiosity to and the courage to actually approach and say like, I was watching this, I saw this, and I think this might need to be addressed. You either gonna be forwarded or guide through the answer, or are going to be pushed for you to actually develop what you want to. I don't think it's a bad way or a bad outcome to approach, but it's always the concern of a student to sound silly, I guess, and to not have enough expertise to be asking some kind of question. Like for me, for example, the story I was telling, they were explaining a worker protection standard, like a federal standard, and I haven't read it by the time I was sitting there, and I made a question that might be silly. Somebody will say like, I might have been given two answers. One, the one that I was given is like, we haven't thought of that. And the second is like, is on page 26, letter B. You can see it there. We can discuss it further if you want to. Like, I don't see a bad outcome coming from an approach for a need or feeling that need.
And building off of that idea, I think that not only wondering if something that you may say may be taken as a silly outcome or something of the sort, but sometimes the fear of an action that you do may not be well perceived. So then you want to hold back doing that action. And I always think back to one of the first conferences I attended for IAEM, the International Association of Emergency Managers, and they do allow students to volunteer. And for every hour that you work during the conference, a certain amount of money comes off of your conference fee. And that was the only way I was able to attend these conferences. But during my position of the one day, I was roaming the floor while they were setting up the expo, which is all the vendors and colleges and all these organizations. And I just remember seeing these people set up, and they kept checking their time to make sure that they would be ready. And I went around and asked if they wanted coffee. And the coffee booths weren't that far from the expo, but they were so focused on what they needed. Stepping away to get that coffee might have taken longer. And I didn't know how impactful that would be until down the road, being able to still connect with people that I once offered coffee to 5 years ago. And those relationships and the connections in the academic world, as well as just being able to talk to a vendor. And when now in my position, or when I'm working with colleagues, or when I'm helping with our state conference and we're talking about a tool, I say, oh, I know so-and-so. Let me see if they're willing to come and participate in this conference, or let me see if they can answer our question about this product that we're exploring. And you just don't know how far the simple question that you may ask may go, what path it could lead you on, or even the simple gesture.
Yeah, the expo is really a great opportunity to do networking, but also when you go to really technical conferences. I mean, for example, for me, the American Industrial Hygiene Association has this really big expo, and they have a lot of private industries and product selling. As a student, you don't have the money to buy any of their products, so you're not their target. But you'll be really surprised when the expo is in their downtown, like everybody's on the conference, and you may not have found anyone like anything that you like. When you roam the expo, they're really willing to show you how the equipment works, the tools that they have. They get really excited with students, and you get a different approach rather than selling you a product. Like you test stuff and you get to know the different companies that work on your field. There is a kind of a different networking too. As a student, I think that was one of the best things that I did, was going to the quiet hours and test a lot of noise dosimeters or fit testing equipment that they were not doing with when the expo was just pretty full of people.
Asking people questions is also something that's really valuable from my perspective as a transdisciplinary researcher. And I think it's something that is a big challenge in transdisciplinary research because you've got lots of experts who aren't necessarily used to not knowing all of what they're working with. So it's a great career tip to be able to ask questions, but it's also a great just networking tip when thinking about building transdisciplinary partnerships or working with people who do things different from what you're used to. So that's a great question. Thank you, Alexandra. Are there other questions? Again, you can feel free to type them or unmute your mic, or if you want to raise your hand. I don't think anyone's hand is raised. Do you have a question, Dr. Kerski?
I just have a comment to what you folks are talking about, like Shannon raised with the expo hall, and then Marysel expanded on that. Much of my work over the last decades with those federal agencies I mentioned and now at Esri is about getting the word out about products, data, tools, approaches. And so a lot of that actually has been in traditional times up until about March of this year, face-to-face conferences and events. So I've been on both sides of that. So on the exhibitor side, you know, and we go to conferences and present and conduct workshops, but when we're not doing that, those activities, we're actually at the exhibit where we talk to people about what they can do with these tools or these data sets or this new application or whatever. So I just would reaffirm what you folks are saying, that oftentimes people are a bit hesitant to come up and ask questions and that sort of thing. But that's what we're there for. So, we don't want to just stand around and look at each other in the exhibit booth. We want to engage with whoever's the audience is. Yeah. So don't be nervous about, I've done the same thing and I'm a little hesitant in going to, I have no idea what they're doing. And I look at their, the backdrop, their poster, their stand, what they've got. What is this? So I'll just say, what can you, and if they can't, and that's another thing coming back to my elevator speech thing, they've got to be able to articulate what they do in, someone who doesn't know anything about that organization or that product. You know what I mean? So I think that's really important in all of our work. So sometimes, I'll go up to that exhibit and I don't really understand what they do and why it matters to me or how it could matter to me. So yeah, you got to get those words down and be able to speak to a lot of different folks. We work with people that are very GIS savvy, but this morning I was talking to a professor and, who's not very comfortable with all of this stuff, teaching, world regional geography and how do I use some of these web mapping tools. So it's like, okay, you don't have to be a GIS guru and neither do your students. And so, it's kind of finding out, like you folks were saying before, listening and finding out what their needs are and then choosing the best tool or data set or approach to meet their needs. So it's not, you need to use, ArcGIS Insights. It's all about, okay, what are your goals? And then how can we help you get there? So, but I think that goes along, ways beyond geospatial technology for sure. Anyway, so many words, but hopefully that was just to reaffirm what you folks are saying.
I also wonder, as we're waiting to see if anyone has any other questions, I wonder if anybody has any tips or advice for reaching out to people or asking questions, building these kinds of networking relationships remotely, because we're not really going to conferences, as we mentioned. So are there any tips you might have for folks students now who aren't able to travel to a conference but might want to connect?
I had a doctoral student that reached out to me recently, I think was August, and she found me through Twitter, which was really a different way, but a lot of us are engaging in social networks right now in a professional way rather than the personal one. So you might be surprised that a lot of us actually reply to DMs, even if they're like it's an academic profile and you had a question regarding research. And she not only she found me to the end, but actually I did talk to her by phone first because she found somebody that was engaging with me. So she found out my contact number from the office, kind of like the social networks piece play a really non-traditional role. I would say like usually you use the email But with now, right now, my inbox, because everybody's virtual, you have a lot of conversations going on, and maybe you need to go and again, stand out and use another mechanism to reach out and see what's going on. So I see a lot of my colleagues moving to social networks to do a lot of outreach, talking to people. And so you start getting to know another set of networks that's going on LinkedIn or again, Twitter. I don't think Facebook is easier than the other two, but it is kind of a way that she approached me. We had a really nice conversation, and we ended up having another meeting to talk about her dissertation with agriculture workers in Puerto Rico. So I guess that's my kind of recent experience with a graduate student reaching out, trying to do it in a different way, engaging with a lot of the professionals that are now switching to social networks and see what the conversation is about and trying to engage. Academic Twitter is actually something that is happening. So.
Yeah, that's definitely true. There's a lot of engagement through social media now, and it's a great way to reach out to professionals. And also, I would say, again, kind of reinforcing points that have already been made, it stands out when you just send an email to somebody. If there's somebody whose research you're interested in, it's pretty easy in the academic world to find somebody's email and to shoot them a message. And faculty's inboxes are jam-packed, but there's not a lot of students who take the initiative to send that message and just say, I really want to know more about what you do. I think you could provide a valuable perspective. Even papers with authors that you really look up to. Those are people who are actually pretty accessible. And there's usually contact information on academic articles. So you can just shoot them a message and start a conversation. Dr. Kerski, were you going to add to that?
I love it. Whenever I contact an author of an article, they are just so overjoyed, like you said, Hannah. I mean, they're just like so thrilled, because oftentimes I think in part of what you're mentioning, that there's just such a deluge now of information. I mean, we thought we had big data in the last decade, right? We've got just amazing amounts, which is wonderful, but then it's like, how do you sift out? And so I find that people generally respond when you say, hey, I actually read your article and I didn't just look at the title, and that kind of goes to our discussion on careers too. Oftentimes people, and I know we're busy, but sometimes people don't do the research on the organization they want to work for. So they'll, for example, apply at Esri and they'll say, I really want to learn more GIS. Great. I want to learn more GIS too. Why would we hire you so you can learn more GIS? It's all about the organization. What value do you bring to the organization? So, do the research on the organization that you're interested in working for, and then craft your sentences about how you can contribute, because it's not about us, right? It's about the organization, unless you happen to be one of those few people that actually have your own private enterprise and you're just the sole proprietor of your own consultancy. When that's great, more power to you. But chances are you're going to be working for, like Shannon, a government agency or a university or a private company, and it's really about how you can help that agency or organization move forward in their goals. Yes, no doubt about it that you want to show that you're a lifelong learner and you want to keep growing. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's good and encouraged, but it's really about how you can help the organization thrive, and then you will thrive and everybody will thrive. Sort of the rising tide floating all boats analogy.
I have to agree, and I have to build up on that. We recently hired somebody, and I do supervise staff in Puerto Rico, and I'm involved in the process of hiring new people, and names can be deceiving, and titles of the position too. So it's really good for you to read the job description and the mission and vision of organizations. In my case, I did have a really high profile with students because of my role in the university government. So a lot of people thought that I did something as an industrial hygienist and didn't know about my new job. So they see the new job post, they see it's related to my office, and they thought something, and they didn't read and go through all the job description. So when I read the cover letters, a lot of them were really missing the point of what we're looking for. So immediately they got like basically eliminated from the race. And then what stood out from the person that actually got hired, it wasn't her GPA, it wasn't the amount of publication, it was her passion and how she talked about what she will do with that position. And I think it's not just only to cover up or do the checklist of the qualifications. A lot of us, like we said, you go out in the field, so everybody who graduated with you can do those checkbox, right? So what is it that you can add to the organization? And what are you going to do with the job that we are offering you? And that speech, like this kind of information that, well, how do you get here? Why do you want to work with us? What is it that you can do with our work? It may sound kind of like cliche, but it's also what it makes you different. Her CV stand out from all the CVs. It wasn't a map like yours, but it was kind of different. It's a lot of pictures and graphics, and it makes you think this is somebody who's creative, who took the time to actually do this and present herself like somebody who wanted to work with us and had some goal oriented, and talked with me about the programs that in our organization that had it like interested more than others. And so, she went through all the paperwork that was being sent and all the information regarding the organization. So that's something that we really look forward, not somebody who, well, I just looking for a job and that's it.
And it's not always easy, because most people I know, when you talk about their career path and how they got to where they are, I know plenty of people who said, and myself among them, I had a spreadsheet of 100 jobs that I applied for. So to really be able to demonstrate that you have the passion and the enthusiasm to actually do these jobs is important, being able to demonstrate that. Did you have Alexandra, another question? I thought I saw you unmute.
Yeah, well, I think that this was such a good conversation, and especially it's made me so passionate to be like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to network and be brave. But I do still think that there's, it's confusing to think, how do I take that network that I build and translate that into a job? Like, should I subtly try to be like, hey, I'm looking for a job, blah, blah, blah? Or should I be upfront about it? I think that's like those small social skills that I think can get confusing sometimes.
Be upfront. I don't think it's any, like, everybody knows that when a graduate student is finishing their degree, they're looking forward. And even if I don't have anything to offer to you, I probably know somebody who knows somebody who has an opening and you can apply to. I even undergraduates and graduate degrees, I think we all, and I don't like to speak for anyone, but I'm seeing like we all have that kind of joy when you help somebody through their career and professional path. So my experience is that I did reach out to my current boss for some help before getting the job. And I was really straightforward, like, I'm doing this and I need your help. Do you know somebody that can help me, even if you don't have an opportunity for doing that internship or program? So I think being honest about it, it doesn't hurt you, and it is expected. And again, it is unusual that somebody reach out to you beforehand, because you see like they're actually using their network and planning ahead or time. So when you do that, it actually talks about you too, rather than I was thinking of you last minute and apply for the job.
I think that's a great point. And to add to that, I guess from my experience as well, I think it's important to put it out there. Hey, I'm looking for a job. Like you said, Marysel, it's usually kind of obvious if you're a graduate student who's entering the career world, but to say like, oh yeah, I'm really looking for a career in XYZ, and you know, et cetera, et cetera. But then after making it known, it's also good to move on from that conversation and talk about like interests and your interest in their company or their work. And I would also say just thinking about the connection between networking and how that goes to getting a job. It could also translate into people who are willing to write you glowing recommendation letters, or it could translate into building connections with people, like you said, Dr. Pagan, who know other people who have interesting job openings. And another point is jobs that you've applied for already. I've gone to conferences and found the people who are in charge of those jobs that I've applied for and said, hey, I applied to this position. It's great to meet you. That was a wonderful session. And it just makes you stand out a little bit more. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that as well.
I think that LinkedIn is also a nice way to be able to show whenever you're looking as well. And should you meet somebody and maybe not find it comfortable to bring up that topic at that point in time, if you are able to connect with them on LinkedIn or social media afterwards. Now, and I'm not sure how old this feature is, but I know that now you can list that you are currently looking for employment and it shows up right underneath your name. And so sometimes even that little subtle modification to your social media page, if it's not appropriate for that conversation or just not something that you normally would throw into conversation, then doing it after the conversation and being able to make that connection does still make that visible. And I don't know too if it's appropriate now, but I wanted to just comment, kind of building off of the ways to also gain experience as this current position is my first full real adult job, as I call it, in emergency management. But a lot of my experience that I've been able to learn has come from hearing about individuals speak who have responded to a certain disaster and their lessons learned, and even reading books written by an individual who experienced an event, whether that be a terrorist event, whether that be a natural disaster, a non-intentional man-made disaster, and reading the individual who personally was there, experienced it in some way, shape, or form, or maybe was slightly removed, has always helped me, especially in my current role of addressing the human side of disaster, to be able to see how they experienced something, what they didn't like about that, and how do we not do that to be able to create a better outcome for the future. And learning from the past is essential, especially if you are entering the career field for the first time in whatever area that you want to learn. You'll be able to gain a wealth of experience and knowledge from the experience of others compared to just maybe having your own personal work experience. And it can really make a lasting impact for somebody, especially looking at maybe more traumatic experiences, and how can you lessen that as subtle as possible to be able to make a turn for the worst be a little bit better for somebody.
Yeah, there's something that's Dr. Torres and I think others here have touched on, and that is the geo-enviro community is extremely earth-centered and focused. We really do care about the planet and its people. And I think an outgrowth of that is our spirit of mentoring, geo-mentoring, in the GIS Corps. There's other examples of people volunteering for worthy causes using the skills and backgrounds that they have in geotechnology or applied environmental science or whatever it is. So, and I assume that there are some elements of that in other fields, but I just really have felt it strongly ever since I, joined this community that, it's just to give you an example, oftentimes people will come to me knowing that I'm at Esri and they'll like, hey, can you donate money and get your name on the building or on the wall of the lab? And I say, you know, we're not really like other organizations that just like to throw money at things and just get their name somewhere and say, hey, look what we did. We're actually into, you know, long-term systemic change. And so it's not as flashy, but I'm willing to work with, you know, whoever calls over the long term to see what your needs are and how we can help. And, you know, that to me is more important than having some name emblazoned in the, although I realize, you know, in times of you know, educational disruption, the funding is really nice to think about. But anyway, that's kind of one example of many that we could talk about in terms of we really are interested in long-term positive change. And so if we can help in any way, all of us, right, collectively, we have our own stories. And I think that that to me is more important long-term in the relationship part of it too, because, you know, years from now, we won't remember. We'll have some, oh yeah, we did that cool thing with GMU, you know, way back in October of 2020, but we won't really remember what our daily task was today, but we will remember, you know, these people that we connected with today. And we could be, you know, lifelong colleagues. That to me is what's really valuable about, you know, this profession. It's the people that you're connected with. And that, as some of you mentioned, that could lead to articles, books, chapters, projects that you're working on together. So it's it's one of those things that's hard to pick out in a you know, a set of tasks or career goals, but I think it's really valuable, this human component.
Yeah, I think that that's a fantastic point. And I really love that you pointed out that even just in this call right now, we are all now connected. We're a network. So for better or worse, I'll likely be reaching out to folks here again to talk about different issues or research or, you know, participation in things. And I would certainly encourage you to reach out to me likewise. But it's, again, these kinds of long-standing or thinking about the long term, I think is really important. So that was a great point. Are there any other questions that people have for our panelists or each other? I also welcome any comments that folks who aren't official panelists have. All perspectives are welcome. All right. Well, if not, I wonder if we could close with going through our panel and having everyone, I know you've shared a lot of amazing tips, but if everyone would be able to share maybe one gem of wisdom or piece of advice that they really want folks to take away from this. Is that something we could do? And I'll start with, well, I'll let you decide who wants to start.
I think in my case, I see everything as an opportunity for learning. And that was most of my case, even if it's a boring class, I think it's a boring class, or a conference, or somebody who's visiting the university, or going to do volunteering work, seeing a tech talk in a YouTube channel, whatever you see, everything is a learning opportunity. And even though you don't seem, it doesn't seem like now, every component of who you are, working on retail, working as a babysitter. I did that when I was in high school, and I did work in a library where I was in my bachelor degree. Everything came into how do I perform my work today, even though it's not technical stuff. Everything, every learning opportunity makes who you are as a worker when you go out. So when thinking in career, I will say on your CV, and when you're doing that interview, not only focus on your curriculum or your publications, but also in your life experience that make you who you are, so you can express to your possible boss or future organization why are you the perfect fit for the job.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kerski, would you like to go next?
Okay, I'd like to build on what Dr. Pagan was mentioning, and that is oftentimes, on a related note, people sort of undersell or underpromote the jobs that aren't related to the position. So, at my organization, they'll tend to discount, I was in retail. Well, you managed people, right? You formed, you managed cash flow. You thought about advertising and merchandising. I mean, there's some good skills in there. So, kind of building on what you're saying, Marysel, I encourage people, hey, along the lines of what you're saying, don't discount those things and don't say, oh, well, that's not related to geo-enviro planning, emergency management, whatever, so I'm not even going to mention it. No, mention those things. So I agree with you. And I've seen that so many times over my career in federal agencies too, where people would not even want to mention. Then you're looking at the resume and they've got 10 years at a certain position and they're not going to mention it. Of course, they gained a lot in that time. So, yeah, I would just encourage you folks to for people watching this later on to definitely do that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Rabia, are you able to hear us still? You are muted. I'm not sure if you're. All right. Well, Shannon, would you have another final word of advice for folks?
Yes, I think my final statement would like to be to take that risk. And as a primarily introverted individual, that says a lot, at least for me. And I had to do that many times to get out of my comfort zone. But taking the risk to step forward and take an opportunity, even if you think the opportunity is bigger than you want to obtain at that point in time, it will still help to be a stepping stone in whatever path you want to follow. And no matter the experience, you learn something from it. So tying together all of our comments in these final moments, everything is that learning opportunity, but no matter how big the experience is or how scary it may be at first, you will still be able to take something away from it. Even if the simple thing is that you do not like whatever topic that was that you worked on for a few years, at least you know that now taking that next step in the different path is the right step for you.
Well, thank you all so much. These were incredible words of advice, and I hope everybody else enjoyed this panel as much as I did. I really appreciate connecting with all of you, and I will certainly stay in touch. We're a network now. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thanks, Dr. Torres, and thanks, everyone. It was an honor, really it was.
Thank you.
All best wishes.